The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not represent the views of any Grand Lodge nor a pendant body of Freemasonry.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Masonic Shelf, where we pick out excellent Masonic literature and books and do our best to make it irresistible for you to read it. I am Chris Williams.
And my name is Brad Kohanke, and this month our choice of books is Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by C.H. Vail. This is a really interesting read. He's got a lot of really good information in it. Obviously, the reason I picked it was because of the title. I love the comparison of Freemasonry to the teachings of the ancient mystery schools, their allegories, and their symbols, and all the similarities that there are. This book was written in 1909, and yet it could, especially towards the end when he starts talking about the Masons hungering for more education on this type of topic, it could be this week that he wrote it. So I'm going to read a brief summary of the book. In Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry, C.H. Vail explores the deep roots of Masonic thought by tracing its symbols, rituals, and teachings back to the mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and the ancient Near East. He argues that Masonry is not simply a fraternal order, but the inheritor of a timeless spiritual tradition. A stream of wisdom passed down through the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, the rites of Eleusis, and the philosophies of Plato and Pythagoras. Vail presents Masonry as a bridge between the ancient quest for enlightenment and the modern search for truth, showing how its allegories preserve the same eternal lessons: the triumph of light over darkness, knowledge over ignorance, and the soul's journey towards greater perfection. The book calls us to see Masonry not only as a moral and social system, but as a living link to humanity's oldest spiritual heritage. I mean, that was enough to make me want to read it, you know?
Yeah, and it's well said. I mean, after you read the book, listening to what you just said pretty much sums it all up. I mean, it really is. It's a good read.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. Let's get into the very first chapter. I'd like to do this chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
And
Can I read something that was in the introduction that I thought was
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, as soon as I opened the book and read and noticed that the table of contents was in the back of the book instead of the front of the book was pretty interesting, and came back up and started with the introduction, and this quote in the introduction really kind of stood out, and I enjoyed it, and gave me a good beginning to go through the book. And it says, modern Masonry has become, in a special sense, the custodian of these ancient symbols, and should not be content with its possession only, nor with merely imitating its various predecessors, but should enter boldly into the inheritance of its birthright and seek the ancient wisdom of its illustrious prototypes. To confine the interpretation of its symbols and legends to lessons and morality and fraternity, such as are found in all exoteric religions, is not to grasp the deeper meaning that the glyphs and the parables were meant to convey. Many today realize this fact, and they are seeking still more light without as well as within the tiled doors of our lodges. And that was cool. I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great quote. So he really kind of sets the tone, right? And I got really excited reading that introduction.
Yeah.
Because, this is right up my alley. This is the kind of stuff that I gravitate towards. But I got to tell you,
it went south all of a sudden, didn't it?
It went south real quick. for me. And then it called into question almost the rest of the whole book. And it wasn't until I got a little bit past the halfway point that I started to realize, okay, well, the stuff that he's saying now is legitimate. He's quoting Pike, he's quoting Mackey, he's quoting Yarker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the second time in 2 months that that guy's name has popped up. I didn't ever hear of him before.
Yeah.
But
I never heard that much of him, but yeah, second time in as many months that we've
yeah.
heard about him.
So the section I'm talking about is the origin of the mysteries. The mysteries had their origin in the first great teachers and guides of humanity. These are called the Sons of Venus, and they formed the nursery of adepts, the nucleus of the first great White Lodge. The chief of these is known by many mystic names in the old writings, the root base of the occult hierarchy, the Kumara, etc. And then he goes on to describe in great detail how these guys lived in Atlantis and uh, taught in the schools of Atlantis, and then were warned that their followers were going to rebel and that the continent was in trouble and going to sink, and so they fled. Before the overthrow of Atlantis, the mysteries were well established in ancient Chaldean Egypt, the two great fourth race nations being offshoots of the great Atlantean civilization. I just put a damper on the whole thing for me, and I almost put it down and called you and said, let's do a different one. You know, I don't know where he's getting this stuff.
I was kind of expecting a phone call, at least something to say. Did you read that? But yeah, I agree. I agree. But from here on, maybe a little bit farther, but from here on, I actually enjoyed a lot of what he said.
Yeah, I
And
did too. I mean, I don't know whether he got it from who Blavatsky or somebody like that, who kind of claims to have known what took place in Atlantis. Um, sorry, I don't buy that. But he's presenting it as if everybody knows it's fact.
yeah, he does. In fact, he makes a lot of assertions in this book that he pretty much believes is fact that
Yeah.
that are that's not necessarily, but very well could be. I mean, very well could be.
So he does talk about the two schools of thought in the modern world, comparative mythologists and comparative religionists.
Yeah,
And he says comparative mythologists contend that the common origin is one of common ignorance, that the universal natural phenomena and the personification of these powers of natures resulted in similar ideas. This school maintains that the loftiest religious sentiments and doctrines are merely the refined feeling and expression of the barbarous guesses of primitive men, that animalism, fetishism, and nature worship are the soil out of which the highest forms of religious flowers have blossomed, and that the founders of the great religions are the highly developed but lineal descendants of the whirling medicine man. So I don't get where he's going with that, but it sounds like he's not too keen on the comparative mythologists.
not at all, not at all. You gonna read the next part because he
Yeah.
because he
On
he
the
he
other
does.
hand, the comparative religionists maintain that the common origin is one of divine wisdom or gnosis. All religions, they say, originate from the teachings of divine men who constitute a great brotherhood of spiritual teachers and give out from time to different races and nations of the world such parts of the fundamental truths of the religion as are suited to the needs of the people. They contend that animalism, fetishism, and nature worship are the distorted and dwarfed descendants of true religious belief, and that the founders of the great religions are men who have advanced beyond normal humanity, thus becoming the spiritual guardians of the race.
Yeah,
So I think we know which camp he falls in,
yeah,
right?
without a doubt. In
Not a
fact,
comparative mythologist.
exactly, exactly. No, he's very definitely in the camp of the comparative religionists for sure. And because he says that the mythologists, there's no basis in fact, and there's no background or anything that gives them any kind of credence.
Yeah. So then he goes on to talk about the reasons for esotericism and a need for secrecy. Why is it, do you suppose, that there was a need for secrecy back in the time of the ancient mystery schools? I mean, were they in the same types of situations that the Middle Ages offered, where they were being um, persecuted and threatened? And
Well, it seems like they, in one form or another, they were trying to protect those secret truths, those esoteric truths that they had, and protect them from being, and 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 it's what happened. What ended up happening, help them, protect them from being what, corrupted or vulgarized or whatever, to the masses. To the large amount of humanity that wasn't ready mentally or any emotionally for that type of teaching. And so they were what, the guardians of the soul's higher destiny. Whatever you could say a lot of things there, but that's supposedly what they were all about, protecting that purification of the soul.
yeah, by the same token, I think there's probably uh, some need for control, right? Yeah, so you limit the number of people that are exposed to the greater mysteries, and you teach the masses the lesser mysteries. So they they taught them the mythology, the mythical stories, as though they were the true stories, and left the explanation of those stories hidden in symbols and passed on to only a select few so that they could control the messaging. But it really kind of backfired on them over the course of the centuries because,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely did.
you teach the lesser mysteries to a greater and greater number of people, and pretty soon they become the dominant force, and the select few who really understood what it meant become heretics.
Exactly.
And
They're the
then they
guys.
wind up getting hunted down and kicked
Yeah,
out.
they're not like us. We got to get rid of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and
Sounds
that's
familiar.
exactly what happened. Yeah, yes, it does. But that's exactly what happened. And we're going to see that when we get into the Christian mysteries, which blew my mind.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about these mysteries that he's referencing. I mean, well, I guess before I get into that, there's a couple of quotes from this first chapter that I wanted to get your take on. The great teachers instructed their chosen disciples in higher knowledge and propagated these truths in allegories and parables. And then he quotes Strabo. All that can be said concerning the gods must be by exposition of old opinions and fables, it being the custom of the ancients to wrap up in images and allegories their thoughts and discoveries concerning nature. I mean, the ancients, studying nature, they come up with discoveries and thoughts and prove it through testing and experimenting. Why not just tell everybody what you found? Why why hide it behind symbols and allegories and parables unless you want to control it somehow?
Yeah,
You
yeah. I
know?
think it's all about control. And but no, I agree. I think it's all about power. And either power, securing and safely storing that information from people who could use it wrongly, to the other end of the spectrum, using it for control of those people.
Mm.
So, wow. it's no wonder that it didn't last. It's no wonder that it got pushed out and pushed away and underground or wherever anybody thinks it went.
Yeah, but like the Eleusinian mysteries lasted for over 1,000 years. It's not like it happened overnight. I mean, they had a really good thing going. And then the Egyptian priests and the whole Isis, Osiris, and Horus story,
Yeah.
um, that was the religion in Egypt for centuries. So,
Yep. Yep.
and then he says the object of the mysteries was the instruction and development of man. Great emphasis was laid on man's immortality, and the object and purpose of the mysteries was to fit him for a blessed state beyond. So, through their observation of nature, the changing seasons and the how they continue to come back time and time again, it just convinced them that the same thing must be true of mankind. They must have a life after what we see here.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh man. He he says one of the quotes that I really liked, and I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but he's talking about the continuation of the mysteries, and he says it is quite a task to follow it through the shifting religious life of the Middle Ages, but recent investigations have shown that it has been unbrokenly continued in secret fraternities from age to age. So there's his take on that underground stream, as you might want to call it,
Yeah.
that where it keeps popping up under different names, different situations. But he definitely believes, and we'll get into that. He's got some quotes about his belief that Freemasonry is a direct descendant. And the thing is, I don't think we mentioned this at the beginning, but Vail is he gave a lot of these lectures in this church, of which he was the pastor of the church. So
Yeah.
he's a Christian minister, and
Well,
I mean,
he's a universalist minister.
right, right,
Yeah,
and he
he's not even a Unitarian because this was prior to the merger of those two things. Yeah, he was a Universalist minister, and so he was open to the truths of all religion, which is probably what drew him to Freemasonry to begin with.
more than likely, more
So,
than likely, and you can see it in the things that he says, because he doesn't navigate or gravitate towards any one uh, uh, side or another.
yeah. So I got a couple of quotes here. Cicero considered the establishment of the Eleusinian mysteries to be the greatest of all benefits conferred by Athens on other commonwealths, their effect having been to civilize men, soften savage, ferocious manners, and teach them the true principles of morality, which initiate man into the only kind of life worthy of him. The mysteries pointed out to men the way to live better and die happier. Boy, that sounds familiar.
Exactly, exactly, for
But
sure.
as we have seen, the object of the mysteries was not merely to teach morality, for as Albert Pike says, had moral truths alone been taught to the initiates, the mysteries could never have deserved nor received the magnificent eulogiums of the most enlightened men of antiquity, of Pindar, Plutarch, Isocrates, Diodorus, Plato, Euripides, Socrates, Aristophanes, Cicero, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and others. Philosophers hostile to the sacerdotal spirit or historians devoted to the investigation of truth. No, all the sciences were taught there, and those oral or written traditions briefly communicated which reached back to the first age of the world. So this, there's Pike's unity theory again, from
Exactly,
Pillars of Wisdom from Rex Hutchins.
right.
Pike was a true believer that everything had a prima religio, a universal
Right.
beginning.
Uh,
So
Original source.
yeah. Thus, the mystery sought to sanctify men, to illuminate their souls, and to fit them to return consciously to union with the deity. The object of the mysteries then was not only to teach the unity of God and the immortality of the soul, as Warburton, Mackey, and other Masonic writers contend, but to enable each man to verify these great spiritual facts for himself. That's pretty cool.
Yep. Yep.
So let's talk about some of these mystery schools, huh?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. We're going to spend forever trying to go through each one, but there's some interesting stuff in some of these. Um, the in the Egyptian, Hindu, and Persian mysteries, that very first introduction was pretty interesting. Uh, Undoubtedly, the ceremonies of initiation were originally few, and all were intended to symbolize the progress of the human soul. They were the outward signs of an inward fact. Initiation, as we shall see in a subsequent lecture, was regeneration, a real spiritual new becoming or rebirth. The candidate himself became the thing symbolized. That that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. The candidate became the thing symbolized. Hermes, Buddha,
Exactly.
Christ, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Egyptian mysteries, he would have been Osiris.
Iris. Yeah.
Yeah. So that myth of Isis and Osiris was an interesting story of itself. You know, Osiris's brother Set was jealous of him and didn't care for him too much. And the old 19th degree in the Scottish Rite kind of acted that story out.
Yeah.
When you go to Guthrie, well, I don't know if they're going to be doing it anymore, but man, it was really cool to watch. But Set was determined to get rid of him, and so he had this coffin built, and he was going to. It was a beautiful coffin. He was going to give it to whoever could fit in it. It was made specifically for Osiris, and Osiris gets in. They slam the lid shut. They nail it shut. They throw him off into the water. Eventually, they find him, release him. Set tracks him down, catches him, cuts him up into little pieces, and scatters the pieces all over the earth. Isis goes around, tries to find him, pieces him back together, everything but the phallus, and she has to make that. And then they have Horus, their son. Horus gets even, kills Set, blah, 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 blah. But so he's the candidate becomes Osiris in this mystery school. And Vail is one of those guys that believes that the original purpose of the Great Pyramids was to act as a setting for the acting out of this myth. So they carry the candidate into the king's chamber through the grand hall, and they leave him in that stone sarcophagus for 3 days. And, no sound, no light, no nothing. I mean, that after a couple of hours, you probably start to hallucinate,
Yeah. Yeah.
So if that is in fact what those things were used for, that's a pretty scary initiation to be left alone in the dark for 3 days.
Yeah.
And then
if you didn't know what was coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you're told to stay there. If you leave, you're out.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that was interesting. But
yes.
And so the same is true with the Eleusinian mysteries. There's this common theme of the death of the hero, and then the resurrection, rebirth, however you want to describe it, of that hero. And the candidate acts it out. I mean, it sounds very similar to what you and I have been through, right?
Exactly.
So, what's the theme of death and rebirth permeates the initiations of all of these ancient mystery schools, whether
Exactly.
it's, Persephone or Orpheus or Krishna or,
Yeah.
whoever. So that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the observation of nature, the death and rebirth of spring, the cycles of the sun, the cycles of the zodiac, how it all just kind of comes back and goes over and over and over again.
Isn't it interesting that in every one of these different mystery schools, there is at least one thing, and in some of them, several things that are identical to what you and I, as Freemasons, have been through in our initiations.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing, when you think about, I mean, I can't really elaborate on them because that would be against our
Well,
obligations. But
yeah, but I know what you're saying. It's like right here it says, when Isis heard what had been done, she set forth in search of the chest, which meanwhile had been carried by the waves to Byblos, where the land wash brought it to rest in a certain heather bush or tamarisk tree, a species of acacia.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
there you got
and
the acacia symbol.
yeah, exactly.
In the Eleusinian mysteries, she eats seeds. Persephone eats seeds from a pomegranate on her way back from Hades.
Yeah,
So there you've got another symbol, the pomegranate.
yeah, and
And then
not
they
only
all,
not
they all have the circumambulation. They all have all of the same stuff.
exactly. It really not just those symbols, but the circumambulation, the entrances, all of those things. I mean, are sprinkled in all of our ceremonies. So
Mm.
that's pretty interesting.
Mysteries had three grades called mortals, intelligences, and creators of light. The mortals were probationary pupils who were instructed in the doctrine, but who had not yet realized the inner vision. The intelligences were those who had attained the inner vision and had become men and received mind. The creators or sons of light were those who had become one with the light and had attained to true spiritual consciousness. Then he goes on to talk about the Hindu mysteries. The candidate might perform his first probation at the early age of 8 years. This consisted of an investiture of the zenar or sacred cord of three threads corresponding to our cable tow. There sat in rich and costly robes the three chief hierophants stationed in the east, west, and south to represent the sacred triad Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And there's a circumambulation again. So
Well, and then the druidical mysteries, it kind of mirrors some of what you were talking about in the Egyptian mysteries, because when the candidate had passed the probationary stage, he was clad in a robe striped with white, blue, and green, emblematical of light, truth, and hope, and confined in a chromalek or tomb for parts of 3 days without food, dead in the language of the mysteries, after which he was liberated for initiation and restored to life on the third day. About the third day.
mhm. So next we got the Gothic mysteries, the fable of Balder and Loki, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Gothic version runs as follows: Balder, who was esteemed as invulnerable, had in the general assembly placed himself in sport as a mark at which the gods exercised their skill in casting darts. Odin and Frigga exacted an oath of safety in favor of Balder from everything in nature except the mistletoe, which was omitted on account of its weakness. Loki discovered the exception and placed a sprig in the hands of the blind Hoder, persuaded Irm to cast it at Balder, who fell, pierced through with mortal wounds. His body was then placed in a boat set afloat on the water, while the gods mourned for his decease. The fable of Balder and Loki, says Dr. Oliver, with the lamentations of the gods for the death of Balder, bears such an obvious relation to those of Osiris and Typhon, or Set, Bacchus and Titans, Kama, Ishwara, that I entertain no doubt that there is a constituted the legend that it constituted the legend of initiation as it is indeed the exact counterpart of all other systems of mysterious celebration.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just one right after another after another.
And then the Grecian mysteries, which talks about the Eleusinian, which is kind of down your alley. Is everything that you read in this one correspond with what you had found before?
Yeah, I think for the most part it's pretty close. And this is kind of where I started to think to myself, okay, well, this sounds familiar. He's not just making it up as he goes. So yeah, that was pretty cool. I like the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yeah, yeah. They've got a lot of similarities to ours.
Yeah, yeah. But it wasn't just the Eleusinian. He had the Bacchic, the Dionysiac, the Samothracian, and he talks a little bit about a lot of them, even Orpheus. Yeah, the Orphic tradition was interesting. I was just reading about that one not too long ago, where his wife dies and he was bereft and made a deal somehow with Zeus to be able to go down to Hades and free his wife from the underworld.
Mm.
And he sneaks his way down there. He gets past Cerberus, the three-headed dog, um, and I can't. I think he was a poet and a singer, and he charmed the dog to sleep. And anyway, he gets down there and convinces Hades to let his wife go, and uh, Hades is like, "Okay, well, if she'll follow you, I guarantee it. The only catch is you can't turn around. You got to keep going. You
Can't
got to
look
keep
back.
going to the top."
Exactly.
So, y- it's a long and arduous path back to the surface world, and he doesn't hear her, he doesn't see her, he wants to make sure she's still back there. He gets all the way to the entrance on land, turns around, and just in time to see her get pulled back. So, uh, another potential death and resurrection, but he blew it type thing.
Then the Jewish mysteries.
Hmm.
I had never read much about the Jewish mysteries.
The stuff that he's talking about is the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar and all the Kabbalah stuff. Um, I thought the interesting part of that section was where he's talking about the Samaritans repudiating the Jewish canonical books. They say they're disfigured beyond all recognition by the Talmudists. They have their own books of Moses, differing materially, yet claimed by the Samaritans to be carefully copied from the original. And then he talks about this group called the Black Jews of southern India know nothing of the captivity, thus proving that they immigrated prior to 600 BC. And they also have a book of Moses which differs greatly from either of the above canonical books. So I want to go find that. I want to
Yeah,
find the apparent Samaritan version and the apparent Southern India version and read them and see just how different they are. That would be a cool rabbit hole to go down.
exactly. Exactly.
Oh, and then he talks about the Essenes, and he's one of those guys that thinks Jesus traveled outside of the Middle East and went to Tibet and then lived with the Essenes, and that's where his teachings came from. I'm not so sure about all that stuff. Paragraph in there, the initiates knew the real meaning of these myths. For literally, the sun is not born and does not die, nor is it raised from the dead. The recitals of these events are allegories which veil a deeper truth. In the popular religions, the sun became the object of worship, and the hero of the myths became the god of the various religions when the symbol was mistaken for the thing symbolized. The myth is an allegory of the activity of the Logos in the cosmos and of the various stages of initiation, and like all the rites, it typifies the mystic life of every initiate. Every perfected master becomes a Christ, a Hermes, etc. Initiation consists in attaining the master state. A failure to understand these symbols and allegories resulted in the crude dogmas of popular theology. The select few teach the masses believe that it's true, and then the select few who have the explanations get caught not believing the myth that they taught and get
Exactly.
accused of heretics and then run out of town on a rail, right?
They're trying to do the right thing, they thought, and ended up coming back to bite them. Before he get into Christian mysteries, he talked about the decline of the mysteries. And
Oh,
there
yeah.
was says the last of the pagan mysteries in Europe disappeared with the destruction of the great cities of Gaul, Alisea, Bibractus, and Arles. And although the great worldwide institution nearly perished except in the East, the secret doctrine was not lost, not entirely abandoned even in the West. It is quite a task to follow it through the shifting religious life of the Middle Ages, but recent investigations have shown that it has been unbrokenly continued in secret fraternities from age to age. And we shall trace this descent in the future lecture. And then it goes into the Christian mysteries, which kind of blew my mind because I had not read.
So in the class that we taught in San Antonio, continuing Masonic education for the Scottish Rite,
Mhm.
there was a degree that dealt with the Christian mysteries. And I don't remember what number it is, but I remember researching it pretty heavily. And I think I even talked to Gordon about it, um, were there Christian mysteries? And he pointed out, yeah, there's the mystery of baptism, there's the mystery of the Eucharist, there's the mystery of the crucifixion and resurrection. So that there are still books out there that refer to those things as the Christian mysteries. I mean, I remember having a cover of a book up on the screen. The title of it was The Christian Mysteries, and it was all about those. So if you look at the development of Christianity in the very early stages, the proto-Orthodox, the Gnostics, and all that stuff, there were so many versions of Christianity up to the Council of Nicaea that
Yeah,
nobody was really sure which version was going to win out, you know? So I'm sure a lot of them, if not all of them, taught in the same manner of the mystery schools of the time because those were the religions of the time. This was a developing religion. So, you've got these believers who are joining the church, and the first thing they get taught is the mystery of baptism.
right.
They get baptized, and then it gets explained to them why and what the purpose is, and then they get told the story of Jesus and the Eucharist, and they participate in a recreation of that with their version of communion or whatever they called it at the time. And then through crucifixion and the resurrection, the whole uh, paying for the sins of the world with the Son of Man held up on the cross, and then
Yeah,
him coming back 3 days later and being resurrected as proof that there's a life after death. And so this progressive teaching of these lessons to these people, it's just like the 3 degrees of Masonry. You get a little bit and then you learn it, understand it, and then you move on to the next one.
yeah,
So it's the same as the mystery schools. You get a
yeah.
little bit, you learn it, understand it, and you move on to the next one.
Yeah, I had heard and read long ago, or I don't know when it was, that the baptism was like the initiatory rite, and then the Eucharist was the rite was the raising rite that raised the candidate to the high, like a high degree, and then there was another grade like initiation of the cross or something like that. That
Mhm.
was that was part of it. But it was interesting. Uh, I read on it in the chapter. Jesus and the author both said that connected the resurrection with the liberation from the death and life alternative sequence, and that he that was resurrected was now a perfected initiate. The phrase resurrection from the dead is a mystical phrase denoting the new birth or Gnostic elimination. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it doesn't, and I think he obviously is a believer in reincarnation because he was talking about breaking the cycle of death
Yes,
and rebirth. So
absolutely.
Um, so to him, the resurrection as an allegory means that they've become the perfected being. They no longer have to come back for further lessons because they still haven't learned their lesson yet. And they become united again with the divinity. They go back, their spirit goes back to God who gave it. And that's kind of where he was going with all of that. I thought that was pretty interesting.
And you're right. There was several versions of that, several versions of the mysteries as far as the different degrees, like Trinity and unity, the incarnation of the, I don't even know how to pronounce that, or Son of God, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the secret of the liturgy, and it was all these different grades.
Yeah, this is really two chapters because it was two lectures.
Yeah, it was the Christian mysteries, and then it was the Christian mysteries concluded. And I don't know, this one quote is in the Christian mysteries concluded. He stated that the Gnostics looked at the problem of cosmogony and anthropogeny from above, and in this they may have been as reasonable in their proper domain as the modern scientist who looks at the problem from below. Until the middle of the second century, at least, they continued a part of the general Christian body. But at last, the narrowness and bigotry of those who followed the outer tradition succeeded in having them denounced as heretics, and this chiefly put them away or had them disappeared.
This is also the chapter where he specifically talks about the King's Chamber and the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I don't know what that has to do with. Oh, he's talking about the narrow way or the straight gate,
Right.
and how those terms were used in all of the mysteries, including the Christian mysteries. Jesus does not use the symbol in any new sense. It's the old straight gate and narrow way of initiation.
And when Constantine, Christianity after Constantine, it had to require that the public, everybody had to be involved. It couldn't have two different levels or anything. So the mysteries being selective, secretive, and requiring spiritual preparation were incompatible with a state religion, and therefore had to go.
So that next chapter was pretty cool because I really liked the information on Origen versus Celsus,
Right.
the argument that they had. The noted pupil of Clement, Origen, in his famous controversy with Celsus, many references were made to the secret teachings of the church. And Celsus charges Christianity with being a secret system, and Origen replying that while certain things were secret, others were public, and says, but that there should be certain doctrines not made known to the multitude, which are revealed after the exoteric ones have been taught, is not a peculiarity of Christianity alone, but also of philosophic systems in which certain truths are exoteric and others esoteric. There's a lot of back and forth between those two guys in this chapter, and I think that was one of the more fascinating chapters because of it. He says, during these early centuries, there was a struggle between the two elements of Christianity, the few who possessed the inner teaching and the mass of common believers. The exoteric element finally gained supremacy, and the mystics were denounced as heretics.
Isn't that the way it goes?
It's always the way it goes.
Always the way it goes.
And then he ends that with, we shall now turn to Freemasonry and show that this institution is a vehicle of the same occult knowledge, that the ancient wisdom is still embodied in its symbolism and rites, and is obtainable as it always has been by those who possess the key. So, Chris, lecture 6, the meaning of true initiation. It is a well-known fact that the biographies of all the great world saviors closely resemble each other. All are represented as divinely begotten. And he says they're all born at the same time of year. I don't think that's accurate. All are threatened with death in infancy. All are tempted, persecuted, and finally slain. All descend into hell, and after 3 days rise from the dead. And at last all ascend into heaven and become glorified gods. Um, yeah, I don't think there's any question that there's some similarities between the heroes of all of the different stories. The important aspect of these teachings is the lesson
Exactly.
that you learn from it, right? Not not the historical accuracy of it, but what is it trying to teach you
Yeah.
about life, about death, about morals and values and what's important. So, each one of these was trying to do that. So what is the explanation of this wonderful similarity in the lives of Jesus, Apollonius, Mithra, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster?
The solution of this remarkable identity is to be found in the fact that all these saviors were initiates into the mysteries of antiquity.
Mm.
That's his point, is that they were all initiates the same way. They're all adepts. The various narratives do not describe the physical life of the heroes, but the inner mystic life, being but a materialization of the mystic life of the initiate. The physical plane biographies might greatly vary, but their lives as initiates are ever the same.
In one breath, he's saying that they're all world saviors and closely resemble each other. And then the next breath, they're all initiates into the mysteries of antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
Were they initiates into the mysteries of antiquity, or did the initiates represent them during the initiatory experience? You
Or
know?
both.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Or both.
but this chapter or this lecture, and this book is a series of lectures. Basically, it's divided into chapters, but these were lectures that he gave. This is the meaning of true initiation, and he's got 5 points that he makes, and one of them is number one is discrimination. This means that the aspirant becomes able to distinguish between the eternal and the temporal, the real and the unreal, so that what is unreal to the world becomes real to him. Number two is devotion to the right. The aspirant learns to do what is right because it is right without regard to his own gain or loss. Three, the 6 qualifications: control of thoughts, purity and calmness, which result from control of mind, control of actions, and mastery of one's actions and words. Tolerance, freedom from bigotry, steadfastness, the incapability of being turned aside from one's purpose, and faith, the confidence in the power of the master to teach the truth and of one's self to grasp and wield it. Number four, direct order or succession, a clearly defined desire for spiritual existence and a union with higher ideals. And finally, number five, a readiness for initiation. So this is all preparatory work before you even get initiated.
He's not required to fully develop all those qualities, but he's definitely supposed to have made progress in them, which kind of in a way is the same attitude that there is in Freemasonry.
Yeah, we take good men and make them better, right?
And
You
they
can't take bad men and make them
get
good.
to be master masons, but they're still working on trying to be that.
Well, and that's why we investigate them before they go through the initiation into the EA degree. We got to make sure that they're of the right ilk, to become Masons. Okay, so this next lecture, lecture 7, is just continuation of the last one. The meaning of true initiation concluded. And I thought that this chapter was better than the previous one because he really kind of gets into some more
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Well, he says the great facts of the spiritual life were carefully guarded in the mysteries and given out to the world only in symbolic language. The solar or sun myth is the popular teaching concerning the cosmic mythic Christ, the Christ of the solar myths or legends. A myth, we must remember, is not mere fiction. It may be truer than written history. It is a great truth embodied in a pictorial form. All symbols were employed by initiates with a definite meaning. We need, therefore, to know the true meaning of the symbols in order to read the true meaning of the myth. So the solar myth sets forth primarily the activity of the Logos, or the mythic Christ, in the universe. The story of the sun god, then, is of utmost importance. It begins with his birth at the winter solstice, after the shortest day of the year, in the early morning hours of December 25th, as the sign Virgo is rising above the horizon. He is thus born of a virgin who remains such after giving birth to her son child, for the celestial Virgo is still unchanged. So he's getting into some of this uh, zodiac illustrations of the sun god, the sun myth, and the timing of the year, the birth of the mythic Christ, and then the doesn't he talk about the spring equinox as the time of crucifixion, correct?
Right.
I don't get that, but I guess he's trying to tie the dates of Christmas and Easter together, as the birth date is fixed, the crucifixion date is not, and Christmas is fixed and Easter is not. So further on in the chapter, he says the mystic teaching in this way became accepted first as history and finally as dogma. Irenaeus was one of the chief developers of the dogmas, and the Gnostics contended that he, like those like him who accepted the crude literal view, did not know the origin and meaning of these things. The Gnostics knew how these scriptures were made, and they possessed a memory of the manner of things done and said from the earliest times, and looked with amazement on the narrow and cramping beliefs of that the bishops of the outer churches were imposing on Christendom as the only truths of the Christ revelation. So, I mean, it's obvious the way that he's writing this, that he is a proponent of the Gnostics. And I think in the next chapter, we're going to see that even more closely, because when we talk about the origin and history of Freemasonry, um, he points out the Gnostics as a potential source of the teachings of Freemasonry. The story of the gospel was originally a religious romance intended for spiritual instruction, but the later bishops of the outer churches, not having the key to the inner meaning, accepted the romance as an actual history. It is said that the common document, which formed the basis for the canonical Gospels, is to be traced to the sketch of an ideal life which was intended for purposes of propaganda, and which could be further explained to those who are ready for more definite instructions in the true nature of the Christ mystery. And this is again, alluding to these Gnostic belief systems that permeated at the time. To a certain extent, it was based on some of the traditions of the actual historical doings of Jesus, but the historical details were often transformed by the light of the mystery teachings, and much was added in changed form concerning the drama of the Christ mysteries. Allegories and parables and actual mystery doings were woven into it, with what appears now to be a consummate art which has baffled for ages the intellect of the world, but which at the time was regarded by the writer as a modest effort at simplifying the spiritual truths of the inner life by putting them forward in the form of what we should now call a historical romance, but which in his day was one of the natural methods of Haggadah and apocalyptic. And this is the book that he's referencing by C.F. Mead. Did Jesus live 100 years BC? The author of this romance never dreamed that the story would be taken otherwise than he intended it, a symbol. But in the compilation of the canonical accounts, much legend and historicized dogma was built around this original romance. I I don't know, man. I I don't know where he gets some of this stuff. So on to the next one. The origin and history of Freemasonry. He talks about a bunch of potential origins, from the guilds of actual stonemasons to uh, the symbols being lifted from Eastern mysticism, Kabbalah, Hermetic, Pythagorean, and Gnostic. Um, and this is where he starts to talk about Manichaeism, the Bogomils, the Cathar, the Paulicians, and the Lollards. They were a secret speculative society with degrees distinguished by signs, tokens, and words, like Freemasonry. Then he goes on to the Knights Templar. And I think this is probably what he believes more than any of the other things, that we are literal descendants from the Knights Templar.
Yeah, he very much believes that. He says Freemasonry is not the creation of the Middle Ages, but the lineal descendant of the ancient mysteries. It has come down to us a vast treasure house of allegory and symbolism in which is concealed the same sublime truths once taught at Eleusis and in the Christian mysteries. And that was a big statement right there, but he believes it 1,000%. And he
Oh
does
yeah, I
believe
don't think there's any doubt that he believes that.
that the Templars got the teachings and everything from the Christian mysteries and preserved them and in some way, shape, or form passed them on to us.
Yeah, and there's a whole chapter of how he thinks that happened,
Yes, for sure,
you know?
for sure. Through Christianity and hidden streams and revived in the form we know now. Mysteries, the church and the lodge are but different veils of one great initiation, the regeneration of man in the divine life. I mean, he believes it hook, line, and sinker without a doubt. He goes in, talks about the Templars and even talks a little bit about the Scottish Rite.
Well, he quotes Pike and Mackey quite a bit.
Quite a bit there. There's a lot of truth out there on how the Scottish Rite uh, came down, and I don't see much of it in this book. Of course, it happened a little bit after that, but he really believes that the Templars were the key.
It's an interesting chapter to read, but I think for the most part, all of that has been debunked, but
Yeah,
whatever.
well, it's been
Um,
talked about so much.
yeah. Well, and it all starts with Chevalier Ramsay's oration, right? I mean,
Yep,
that's the first time we hear it historically. And then
right.
and then everybody just started believing that it was true. And
Well,
there's nothing to disprove it, but you can't prove a negative. So
right. I remembered when I was reading this that I had read someplace how Masonry came about, and I can't even remember where it came from. God, I may have read this book before and not even known it, but in this book, I went back and I saw it. It started with ancient mysteries, then the Christian mysteries, suppression by the church, survival in hidden orders such as the Templars and mystic sects, then transmission into Masonry via the guilds and the esoteric fraternities, and then the Scottish Rite as a modern recovery of the old initiations. That's interesting. That's an interesting lineage right there.
well, the last couple of chapters are really the symbols and legends of Freemasonry, and kind of already know all of that stuff.
And they're pretty much the same as everybody writes.
I mean, he does talk a little bit about the apron, which is more than what we get in Lodge.
Right,
Still not all of what you and I tend to believe is true, but
right.
it's still, it's worth reading. There's no sense in us talking about it because some of this stuff we're not supposed to talk about. Is there anything else that you had that you wanted to talk about? Because I want to read the last couple of sentences at the end of the book, kind of as a way to wrap this up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had that too. So go ahead, get after it.
Okay, let us not be content with the mere rudiments of our philosophy. That skill, says Mackey, which consists in repeating with fluency and precision the ordinary lectures, in complying with all the ceremonial requisitions of the ritual, or giving with sufficient accuracy the appointed modes of recognition, pertains only to the very rudiments of the Masonic science. There are many today who are not satisfied with these preliminary requirements and cry out for more light. And this is being heard in every corner of the Masonic world. Intelligent Masons are beginning to realize that there is something more in our symbols and legends and they are seeking their inner and ultimate meaning. Let us aid in this work by making our lodges schools, our labor study, our wages learning. Thus may we attain that knowledge of divine truth which shall truly make us master masons.
There sure is. So, what'd you think of this book overall?
Well, I'm glad I read it, but it wasn't what I expected, nor is it what I was hoping for. There's a lot of stuff in here that to me is questionable research. And I don't know where he's getting a lot of this stuff, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's somebody who contacted a long dead spirit through a seance or something.
My take on it is just a little bit different because of some of the things that I read in it, and I was really intrigued, I guess is the word, by some of the things in the Christian mysteries. Uh, uh, his adamant exclamation that we are lineal descendants from the ancient mysteries. Uh, if I take a what if attitude, there's a possibility. I guess there's just as much of a possibility that there is that there isn't. So for me, it gave me a lot of rabbit holes to go down and to do some more thinking, made me think about a lot of other things. And from that perspective, I enjoy it. I started out, I didn't enjoy it a lot right at the beginning, but as we got on, it got further on, it got more and more interesting, and I quite enjoyed it. Whether I believe everything in there, I can't say yes or no, but I think it was a worthwhile book to read, and gave me some information, and tied a couple of loose ends together. So in that respect, I thought it was a worthwhile read.
So how many white balls are you going to give it?
I'm going to give this book, and this is going to probably rankle you a little bit. I'm going to give this book 8 white balls.
Wow. Wow.
Just because it made me think. It made me, there was a part of it that made me want to continue and keep going to find out more. So I learned some stuff that I didn't learn before. Whether it was true or not, I learned some stuff that I didn't know before or hadn't heard before. So that was worth it. What about you? How many white balls?
I think I'm going to give it a 6.2.
6.2.
Yeah, this is the lowest rating I've ever given.
And that's only because he can't call you up tomorrow and ask you what the heck.
That's right. I had a hard time reading this book.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, this book and I really got off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to ferret out the good information from the questionable information. I think that there are books out there that are much better on this subject matter. And I think if you want to understand Freemasonry's tie to the ancient mystery schools, this probably is not your go-to book. I'm going to put it on my shelf, and I probably will never crack it open again. But I've got a couple others on this topic that I crack open constantly. So,
Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's my take. Meh.
Well, it was worth it. If
Well, I'm glad you liked it.
if at the end of the day it touched something inside of you or made you think or something like that, then it was probably worth it to that extent.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I read it. I mean,
yeah, it's kind of like going into a restaurant that you didn't like completely, and you walk out and you go, "Well, I've been there once."
I know not to go back. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Masonic Shelf. Next month, I believe we're going to try to have an author to talk to. So stay tuned for that one. But in the meantime, keep reading, brethren.